Nice mountains. The title on this book is The Illumined Ones. Hi, I'm Susan from Worldpeacefull, and as what seems to happen in my life, I find things and then I feel to read them, and then I have a look at it and I go, oh my goodness, this is wisdom. I'm just going to go quiet for a moment because I'm going to sense what I want to say. There is an inner sanctuary within all of us. Every single one of us, actually. This is the equality that I talk of. I often call it in poetry the equality tone. It's like a sound. There is a sanctuary inside every single person, and this is the place of peace. That's why peace is not something that you can find outside of yourself. The same applies to wisdom. All wisdom is knowledge applied. It's not that certain people are more wise than others. It's just that people are focused on that wisdom as important. They want to know the truth. Wisdom has within it truth, of course, because you cannot access wisdom unless you're prepared to look for the truth. Also, it comes from experience. We have a physical life. We go through trials and tribulations, highs and lows. And I sort of envisage it like the Philosopher's Stone, which I've talked about before, which is really that life shape changes you. Like a sculptor would chip away at marble, life chips away at you because of the rigidities, the inaccuracies that you have projected onto the world come back in one form or another and can be quite painful. Love is not painful, but fear is. Fear generates this sense of vulnerability, mortality. And so people seek to avoid pain, they seek to maximize pleasure, and this is probably where economics probably originated from, really. People trying to shore up, make sure that they had the power or control to get what their needs met, really. People are wanting control over life because they're fearful of the being out of control or out of order, is what some have termed it. What is order? Typically, they're patterns that we recognize as logical. This comes before this, becomes before this, comes before this. Logical could be our lineage going back in time. If we were to travel right back to the very origin of our lineage. So biologically, we've got ancient parents who started the ball rolling in this lineage, but all lineages ultimately came from the original blueprint. And one could drill down even further and say it came from, original first thought, or some people call it that. I don't think it was a first thought. I think it was to do with emotions. But that's another story altogether. So illumination, illumined. This book is The Illumined Ones. So clearly this is where it really came from. For those who want illumination, real illumination, it really is to stay very anchored in truth and goodness. This can sound, for some, Pollyanna-ish, but interestingly enough, these are words are constructs. The goodness feels good. I'm going to sit with goodness. What is that? Real goodness comes from a recognition that we're all one. It's seeing yourself definitely in the other. When someone does a good thing for another person, there's love there. That's why they do it. They feel good doing it. the reward is actually in the positive action, not in any monetary advantage. So sometimes people go into helping the poor, because they want to, they feel for their circumstances. They put themselves in their shoes. I spoke with a woman who had a conflict at the library last night, and it actually went on for quite a while, this conflict with the library guy. And she was so persistent in wanting to be heard. And I thought, I'm going to have to intervene because he's not handling it well. He just keeps confronting her. And there's a library full of people. They're all trying to work. So it could escalate. So I ended up putting myself between the two parties. Firstly, I gave her a hug. I said, I understand you want to be heard. Then she sort of kept talking. And I said, I think, though, that there are other people in the library and this needs to stop, because people are trying to work. And the library guy backed off a little bit. And she still kept on, but I managed to divert her, and I got her to come outside, and I spent a good hour with her listening. I won't go into her personal disclosures with me out of respect for her, but what I'll say is that what she was suffering, I understood because I'd been through it myself. Some of the key issues were powerlessness, stonewalling that she'd had in her own life with male figure, her need for independence, injustice, railing against injustice, seeking out fairness. And when we talked, I said to her, I understand, but the thing is, the world's not going to turn up the way you want. We can keep persevering, as I've done, but ultimately, one always has to turn back to oneself. Do we want happiness? Do we want misery? Are we going to keep hitting our heads up against brick walls of our own making as well? I say that because we want something to be different to what it is, the reality of which is that it is what it is. So the work of Byron Katie I often talk about to anchor one's groundedness, if you like, in reality, which is now. Reality is not in the future. It's not in the past. It sits squarely where I am right now. And where I am right now, if I just move away from my memory from the past, is I'm in a place of peace and joy. So whenever I return back to who I am, happiness is naturally there for me. I was going to say fortunate, but I guess, I don't know, what is that? Truth. I'm into truth. So the truth actually sets you free from the sadness is what I'm feeling. So that lady and I, we became friends. I gave her my card, told her I was homeless because this is extremely interesting. She said to me, I'm not homeless, and I'd never said anything about myself being homeless. She goes, I'm not homeless, but I feel it in my heart. I feel homeless in my heart. I've got no home. And I said, it's really funny you say that because I said with my work on homelessness, and I said I am homeless, is that I actually see homelessness way beyond the need for a house. In other words, people can be homeless in loveless marriages. They can be homeless in workplaces where they're not liked or they don't feel connection with anyone. They can be homeless in work that they're doing that doesn't feel right. They feel it's like a slavery for them. So the real underlying issue there is what is home. And for me, I'm definitely seeing it as home is where the heart is. It's to love yourself and love others. And obviously there's metaphysical, bigger spiritual reality around that even. Home is when you really feel connected to the source of who you are, let's say, put it that way. Because it comes in lots of manifestations. People have lots of mythologies and religions around it, which are all perfect for them. I don't see any particular way as superior to anything. I think you go with what resonates for you. That's living your own truth. You can't pretend an interest in something unless you're truly drawn. Some people do things for salvation. They do things for a sense of friendship. They want friends. They want community. They may not necessarily be really exploring what that origin is. She had a religious or spirit, well, I guess, I don't know if it was religious, maybe, background, but certainly she had a belief in God. So what I tried to do with her was remind her that what happened was meant to happen. And it's not a right and wrong issue. It's a question of both of them were seeing the situation differently, both had different priorities. She didn't feel heard. He didn't know how to handle that. He didn't know how to sort of reflect back to her, okay, I hear what you're saying, because it was about chips, actually. She would have been eating hot chips in the library. He smelt it. He felt it was disruption. And that was the conflict. But beneath that conflict was powerlessness issues. And see, he wasn't aware of that because he's not trained in conflict resolution. He's not trained in the peace area. So he doesn't know that behind the mask of her conflict with him, her feeling injustice, her feeling anger, was a deep-seatedness of powerlessness that had come from her background. And of course, he's not going to really truly understand that unless he's walked in her shoes. So people can present in conflict that they're arguing over a certain position. They take a position, I'm for, you're against, and I'm right, you're wrong. So this is the adversarial structure. And not really recognising that really what's being triggered here is an emotional wound from the past. And because people aren't very conscious when they're upset or even when they're in these conflicts, they're not aware of what's really driving the conflict because they've not self-reflected. They don't know themselves and they're reacting and they're really sure they're right. We all are, aren't we? Until you sit back later, if you're really into truth, you have to actually look and go, okay, well, there are two sides, if I'm fair. So she was saying, well, if you're not allowed to have food in the library, just put a sign up so people know where they stand. Fair call. And then I found out later from him, because I had a chat with him after. He appreciated me coming in because I actually diffused two conflicts. Another guy was going to get into it as well. He was going to attack her. It was very interesting to see how she triggered others. So they had wounds unhealed too. So going back to him, he thanked me. And I said to him, I've got training in this area. But he also revealed to me that he doesn't really like putting signs up. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. I said, yes, but you're dealing with a public now that may not know. Like, for example, putting your feet up on seats. A lot of young ones are actually quite neglected these days because their parents aren't home. They're either split up, working late. They're not really getting the guidance. Their grandparents may not be around. So this is why we're seeing behaviours and people of my generation might look at that and say, oh, how rude, how disrespectful. That's a common word. But in actual fact, they don't know. And if people sat down and really dialogue, and this is why I'm always promoting it, you go, oh, okay, they didn't know. They weren't being disrespectful. They just didn't get it. See, we don't communicate. This is where all the conflict in the world arises from, is this certainty that I'm right, you're wrong, I know the right way, you're going the wrong way. It's coming from a morality that's unquestioned. Now, goodness I brought up before, what is that? Goodness is like a joining, it's like a unity, it's like a bringing together. It's a releasing from the negative. It's a space where there is no negative. It's the same as love. When you feel really, really good. So purity is what I feel. If I don't engage in negative conduct, which is my nature not to, in actual fact, I'm not drawn to it. Sometimes when we get angry, we can get locked in energetically, and that's what happened with these two in the library. They were locked into an intractable conflict that neither could pull away from because both had wounds on either side. They were not skilled in knowing, in having that sort of sense of awareness to look upon that situation and evaluate it. So we can easily come into the negativity. The goodness is what the anchor is. The goodness is to see myself in the other, is to give more room for I could be wrong. And that's not a defeat. When you open your mind to I could be wrong, it means that I can't possibly know everything. I don't know this person's life. I know nothing about them. I could be wrong. That's wisdom. People go, how can that be wisdom? How can I be wrong be wisdom? Because I'm simply recognizing the truth of I don't know everything. Where I sit here in this type of reality, I don't know everything. There's a humility in that. And what it does is it releases you from the conflict, because you go, okay, there may be more to this than I understand. They're really upset. I think I'll just step back and reevaluate. Now, how do I meet with this other? Well, you give them some validation in what they're saying. I hear you. I may not understand what you're saying, but I'm listening and I'm willing to reflect on what you're putting to me. In the case of the chips, it's a minor incident, but nonetheless for this woman, she was crying outside later because it triggered bigger things for her. So the issue is not really the chips, but let's just play with that for the moment. He's believing that the smell of the chips is affecting others, and no one had complained, so he was making a judgment. It had actually affected him, and then he believed it could affect others. So in reality, there was no real issue on either side. She said she scrunched up her chips so that people couldn't smell it. I mean, it's a small thing, but that's what she was doing. She was trying to be respectful of others, but she was really hungry because she'd worked and she was wanting to do some work at the library because that's her space. And he came and told her to stop it. And she felt affronted, misunderstood, felt that he was targeting her. He felt what she was doing was the wrong thing. You don't bring into a public place hot chips, and yet people are allowed to eat in there. So there's a grey area. So there's not clear rules of how we conduct ourselves in this space. And so she was quite livid when she went up to the counter because he apparently pulled her up on another thing on a few occasions, and she felt he was not the nice guy she thought he was. And so she kept labouring the point, and when I had her outside later, I just sort of said, that can look like nagging, because you're constantly, it's kind of badgering. Because she's irritated. But if you can withhold judgment when a person is in that space, see, I wasn't judging her. I was just seeing that they were locked into conflict. She actually was articulating very clearly. And he was sort of blocking her because he didn't agree. But he didn't know how to say, okay, I hear you. I'll consider what you're saying. But if you can bring in other food, like cold food, but doesn't smell, then I will be satisfied with that. See, they could have negotiated. They didn't have negotiation skills. And as I said, I then took her out and had a very long talk with her. And I realised that I know this is my work. This is what I'm here for. And this is the rebalancing of the opposites that perceive themselves as opposites, but they're actually not. They're actually mirrors. He said, and when I talked to the guy at the library a little bit later, he goes, I don't normally, get into a fight. And I said, well, we're all teachers, aren't we? She's a teacher to you and you're a teacher to her. Something was triggered. Isn't that interesting? I said, maybe go and reflect on it, how you could handle it differently next time, So there's no right and wrong in this. It's not that he failed. He just had an experience. And as I said to her, you and I wouldn't have met had you not had that, because I wouldn't have gotten involved had you not kept going on. And I said, and we've just had a great discussion and you're feeling peace around that. So she then went away feeling validated. He went away in a positive mode because I reinforced some positives for him too, because they're not bad people. They just misunderstood each other. And I just reinforced that she wants to come into the library again, but doesn't want to feel uncomfortable. And I said to him that I told her that you'd be fine with that, and of course he is. He couldn't not be. Professionally speaking, he couldn't not be. And I said to her later, he's fine with you coming in, so that she would then come back in. Because what we tend to do when we have conflicts, I'm never going to talk to that one again, I'm not coming back here, and I've done it. And it's like, no, you go back. But you go back with a more positive attitude. And they may not respond. I mean, they might go, the word carry the hump, it's kind of a terminology, but it's like they might just, I'm not going to talk to you. We can be little kids, Or they may also want to resolve it. Of course, my advocacy would be everyone has to resolve all conflict. And as I said to her, you've got to feel your feelings all the way through. What you feel is what you feel. So on that note, speaking of conflict, I'm going to now take you to a story based on this book, The Illumined Ones. And I felt very much to read this. So this will be a little bit of time in this, but it's well worth listening to. Now, I'll premise this by saying that what drew me to this was the Mayan civilization. I went to Mexico when I went on my world trip. And for those who don't know, I'm a peace clown. I travelled the world as a clown. But I remember being at the airport in Mexico, Cancun. And I was saying to myself, why am I here? Like, I had no plan to come to Cancun. It just ended up, being on my schedule going around the world. I had a world ticket. But I'd picked up a brochure at the airport, and then I'm saying to myself, why am I here? And I opened this brochure, and I saw Chichen Itza. This is the Mayan pyramid. I knew nothing about Mayan civilization. I had no background in history. So my travelling the world was a real eye-opener for me. So Chichen Itza, I went and stayed with a Mexican, couch surfing, living in very primitive dwelling, concrete. They have concrete block type houses. Remember, his stove was rigged up with gas. I think there was 2 gas pipes that, on a little stove. He had a pipe coming out the wall. That was the shower. There was no rose. He was living in poverty and he was studying. Nice guy. If you go to my book, you can download it for free, or you can buy it if you want to support me. I am homeless. Every little bit. I've got $2 in my account now, so I consider myself rich. I can at least buy one $1 coffee now, and that's it. Don't know where the next money's coming. I'm just waiting with love and patience that life so far has supplied my every need whilst I work on peace. And this is my work. This is what I'm here for. So going back to the guy in Mexico, he was really lovely. He said to me, I advise you to go to Tulum, which is a Mayan pyramid, and Chichen Itza. I went, oh, that's the one I saw on the brochure. So I ended up catching a bus. So to make a long story short, I go to Chichen Itza. They're really interesting pyramids. They're square ones, not the triangular ones you'd see in Egypt. There's all been different types of pyramids around the world. I was just thinking of Africa, Sudan. I think there's pyramids there too. Anyway, it's got a square top and it's a big pyramid. The size of it has meaning. They have numerical systems. I remember looking at one of the walls there. It had all these numbers all over it, and I didn't know what that meant. They also had sports where they threw balls through hoops, but I don't know. There is another side to that story which is probably not quite so positive. But nonetheless, this was a Mayan civilization, sort of an Indian native civilization, very advanced. Like many civilizations in those days, they didn't build with mortar. They were perfectly constructed. They had huge blocks that built these pyramids. Engineering in those days was far more advanced than it is today. So I come into this area and they have markets like on either side of the footpath. So you've got people selling things. I always remember the cougar whistles. Sounds like a cougar. But I remember consciously shutting out all the noise. And I was focused on the pyramid and very interested. And then I found myself overwhelmed with emotion, and I dropped to my knees and I cried. Had no idea why I was crying. And I still remember the thoughts going through my mind because I was conscious of people looking at me. And I thought, I'll be thinking I'm a, what is it? Loco, you know, this, I'm just trying to remember the words now because it's been a while since, gringo, right? This loco gringo on her knees crying. What is she doing? And then I remember I had a look at some of the carvings in the walls. There were serpents. These were actual sculpted serpents. And I thought, oh, the feathered serpent. Interesting. Quasicol is an icon to do with peace, balancing opposites. I remember walking into the forest because I like to get, it's funny, I wasn't really going into all the ruins. I just wanted to go into the forest. And I found a tiny little pyramid. And I actually brought that back to Australia. I gave it to someone who was into spirituality. I gave all the rocks. I picked up rocks from all over the world too. Gave them to someone. But that site was most definitely significant. I haven't really done a lot of reading on the Mayan civilization. Of course, 2012 was seen as the end of the Mayan calendar. Like most native civilizations, they were very tuned into the moon and the sun, planets. Pleiades were seen to be attached or connected to the Mayans. When I was in New Zealand, I found out that the Maoris had a connection to the Pleiades. I also found out that the Australian Aborigines did too when I was at Woomera, of all places. That's a missile range yeah, in South Australia. They had a small section of the museum which was really celebrating militarism, but a small section of that museum at Woomera, which is military base, was about the Indigenous Aboriginals and their connection to the Seven Sisters, which is what the Pleiades is called. So they were star civilizations. The Dogon people too. Sirius was their connection to that planet. So we have ancient civilizations. Orion is Egypt. In fact, the Egyptian pyramids are are believed to be in the configuration of Orion's belt. So we're talking a star connection to these ancient civilizations. Very interesting. Anyway, to the story. This is actually a Mayan, and this is called The Wisdom of Hawata. Hawata. Nice sound. So this is someone who's writing about a recollection of a life in a Mayan society. But what I want you to take from this is some of the wisdom and how they resolve conflict as well. So I'll probably do a little bit of commentary as I go through this. During early manhood, Hawata went through the prescribed tests and gained illumination for mind and heart. He spent many months on the mountain with the brothers of the land of light, and they taught him the art of healing by colour rays drawn from the sun and transmitted to the sick. Isn't that interesting? They taught him as well how to withdraw from the dense body and go to the land of spirits. I think the Egyptians did this as well. How to cross the great ravines in the mountains by levitation. How to help those who were sick in mind. As time passed, Towan and I learned how to make use of some of the magic powers, and we grew to maturity in this simple, childlike community, taught by Chief Hawata how to rule with love, how to live in peace with all human and animal life. That sounds good to me. The Mayans never slew any creature wantonly, so they never killed any animal just for the fun of it. You know, we have people going out and having a great time shooting kangaroos and God, for fun. The hunters down in Africa. So the Mayan don't do that. If it became necessary to kill for food, they would do so, first thanking their brother, the animal, whose life they were compelled to take, for his sacrifice and for the gift of his flesh. Just note that there's a masculine around this, his or her. We often discard the feminine. And it seems as normal, so you won't even notice it unless I bring it up. I'm just doing that because there is two aspects of the one, if we're honest. So a spirit of brotherhood, cheerfulness, kindness, and service pervaded the communal life. A spirit taught them by word and deed, by Hawata. We all shared alike. No man dreamt of taking more than another, for each recognised the other's needs. See, that drives to the heart of greed, doesn't it? I like that. No man, and we'll just say, I'll only do this one more time, or woman, okay? Man is mankind in this case. No man dreamt of taking more than another, for each recognised the other's needs. So when we take more than another, we're not recognising the other at all. It's all about me. This is why we often call this the me generation, because we're not aware of the other. Hawata was wise in head and heart, with deep spiritual intelligence. For all he knew came from the illumination of his soul by God's light. He saw that the only possible basis for true law and just government was brotherhood, simple kindliness, practiced and lived. He knew that if brotherhood was established, peace must follow. With progress in arts and sciences, well-being in body, soul and spirit, and indeed the law of brotherhood, recognition of the equal needs and rights of all men, proved effective for the settlement of any problems that might arise in the affairs of our people. So clearly that's talking about conflict, but there is a basic law of brotherhood, which is kind of like, well, I guess the Christians would say we are a brother's keeper, brother and sister's keeper. Recognising that there's equal needs and rights of all people. When we become singular and it's all, again, about us and we forget the other, this is how conflict arises. So that's the basic philosophy. And I'll try not to speak to this too much. I might just read it. On the first of each lunar month, the day of the new moon, Hawata would attend the court of justice. This was held in a stone building rather than a large summer house, where flowering vines grew up the stone pillars and over the dome they supported. The interior consisted of a fairly large assembly hall with a low wall that divided the court from the gardens, and an inner council chamber at the far end of the entrance hall with an opening like a window that gave a wide view of the river and mountains on the horizon. Here, seated on the seat cut whole from the trunk of a great tree and shaped into a dais, D-A-I-S, or throne, its back carved in the figure of a plumed eagle and surrounded by grapes and wheat. Chief Hawata listened with grave patience to the questions and problems his people and the younger chieftains submitted to him. Some came from over the mountains, others from villages near and far, down the great river. Most were simple, primitive, kindly, yet a few harboured the seeds of doubt, fear and greed, the beginnings of discontent and strife. A young chieftain named Armoric arrived one day to ask what he was to do in the event of a poor harvest that threatened his people with famine. His own lands were producing insufficient food. The chief of the neighbouring tribe refused to lend acreage except at an exorbitant price. Was he to pay, or should he take land by force of arms from his neighbour? Knowing that he and his people could win and confiscate what they needed. If Amaric acceded to his brother chieftain's demands, he would probably impoverish his own people and make them go hungry, pending a better harvest. He claimed every moral right on his side. The other man's attitude was harsh and wrong. He could fight and probably win. What should he do? Hawata listened intently and sat for a long while with eyes closed as he consulted with those who were invisible. So they went silent. He asked that the other chieftain be sent for, who, having made obeisance before the father of his people, debated nothing of his case and sought to justify it, pleading poverty and the need to accumulate ample stores against possible adversity. His own people's rights, he said, came before those of Amaric's tribe. If anyone suffered, it should be they. Then he grew angry and incoherent under the gaze of those wise eyes that saw deep into the heart and at length fell silent. Hawata spoke gently, as befits one who though in authority is kindly withal. Yet there was weight, power in every word, and no word failed of its mark. He who puts himself first, the welfare of the family or tribe before the common good, dies the slow death, he said. First zest dies in the heart, though no man knows it. For the voice of conscience that should be a wise counsellor becomes a canker. He no longer has any pleasure in living, and his days are cloudy, heavy, his body becomes diseased, and death, instead of being mellow and kind, comes like a tyrant who brings cruel suffering. The unjust man cannot evade this, nor will his possessions remain for the spirits of earth, air, water, and flame, seeing he truly deserves the slow death, will refuse their help. His crop will fail, and storms will blast his property, floods will drown cattle and sheep, irresistible fire will devour his substance. And the hereafter waits. Hawata turned to Amaric. You have heard. If this man chooses the way that leads to the slow death, do not hate him. So in other words, if he chooses the way where, he's going to charge him exorbitant amounts of money, deny him the land, he's choosing the way of the slow death. So what they're saying there is that zest in the heart, this is the enthusiasm for life, goes. So when you are unkind to others, you suffer, but you may not be conscious of your own inner suffering. You might fill those gaps, keep yourself busy. That's what we typically do when we feel guilt. So I'll read that again. Hawata turned to Amaric. You have heard, if this man chooses the way that leads to the slow death, do not hate him, but rather pity him with all your heart, for he will need it. Harbour neither resentment nor bitterness. Cleanse yourself of these, and the spirits of earth, air, water, and flame will serve you, in such manner that your crops will grow more plentiful, and you will be rich in blessing. Hate the oppressor in your heart, and you too will die the slow death. This is why I say there's no enemy. You suffer when you project out onto the other as the enemy, and you're holding that negativity within you. That's what that means. You will suffer a slow death. You know, many people are actually suffering slow deaths. You can see it when they get cancer, or they're suffering at work. They get sick, they've got backaches, they've got headaches, their bodies are hurting. This is how the disease takes root in the body. Dis-ease. Now, I talk about Patch Adams. I'm just doing a quick allude here. He's a doctor and a healer. He brings joy. He encourages and inspires love, unconditional love to all people as a clown. As a doctor, he recognised that healthy community is absolutely essential if we're going to have a healthy and peaceful world. This is not understood by those in power at this point yet. They still think it's about conquest. They think it's about control. But what they don't know is that as they harm others, they harm themselves. I call that sometimes what you do to another returns to the self, for those who have been watching my videos. This is the quintessential wisdom that I'm sharing here. Those words that I've sort of shared have come from higher sources, really. Life is the mirror. That's where the understanding has to be really clear. What you see in another is in yourself. That's why there's no enemy. The problem is not to go and fight out there and root out that problem and suppress that other and change legislation to suppress rights and all the rest of it. It's actually to look within your own self. It has to become an inner investigation if you want either peace or some semblance of stability, if you're not quite ready for peace, okay? So I'll read on because this is wisdom, and I don't have a doubt about it. Suffer injustice with forgiveness. The other is your teacher. Forgive them. They know not what they do, right? If they knew what they were doing, they wouldn't do it. They think that there's an advantage in what they do, so they do it. And they think it's separate. But what they don't know is that what goes around comes around. But nonetheless, suffer injustice with forgiveness and all will be well for you. Hawata pleaded with the two chieftains, brothers of my heart, you will not meet one another. I am Hawata, would touch you with hand of love, hold you together in brotherhood. My heart is sore because of your enmity. Take each other by the hand and go back to your place, asking the great white spirit to shew you the way of blessing. So reconcile, walk together. Receive the blessing from that peace. Hearing this, the two went their way, hand in hand, like children that are sorry. Presently, a man and a woman were brought before the chief for stealing the precious possessions of a former employer who had fallen sick through the loss. But when the accuser was questioned as to what had been stolen, he declared that it wasn't gold or precious stones or good food. But these two had spoken untruthfully and evilly against him, with the result that many who had thought of him well and kindly now despised him. He had been robbed of a good reputation. How could he recover what their vicious tongues had taken so wantonly? After deep thought, Hawata said to the slandered man, there is no need to defend virtue. No man can rob his brother or sister of what has become an integral part of his soul. It is impossible to uproot goodness and purity from the heart. Vicious, empty, and foolish words are like dust driven by the winds into nothingness. But with every cruel and unjust accusation or criticism, the shadow in the heart of the man that utters them grows darker and denser. So what that's saying here is when we're critical of other people and we're gossiping behind their backs, we're putting them down, we're affecting their reputation. And I can see this on many levels. I can see this in intelligence operations where people have been undermined. I can see it through media spin, where a person's reputation has been maligned, or they've been accused of something that's untrue. What the accuser doesn't understand is that when they speak in this way, they're actually creating the shadow in their own heart. So the very evil that they're, saying, oh, this one's of this and this one's of that, and what a loser, we're going to make them pay. As they speak in this way, the shadow within their own heart grows because they're in a negative space. You cannot look at someone and condemn them and be cruel to them and retain that sense of righteousness that you are somehow the pure one who's right. The reality is quite different. You're actually darkening your own heart by separation, by cruelty, by unkindness, by lies or deception, self-deception. You affect yourself, is what is being said here. So what is said further with this is, therefore it is your duty to inspire confidence in these two and to help them. If you can forgive and forget, they will learn respect. So you can't force respect. It's actually about allowance. It's letting go. Let them criticize you and condemn you and treat you badly. Let them do it. And forgive that because, really, it's done out of ignorance, in my opinion. He then goes on to say, they've caused you suffering, but there is a deeper scar in their hearts. And this is where empathy joins us. Because for someone to be unkind about you or even cruel to you, they have to be in pain themselves. And once you recognise that other's needs, it's not actually that hard to disengage from the conflict and recognise that they're suffering. So you don't feed it. He then says, can you not pity them? Pity is not a word I typically use, but I would tend to use the word empathy, but this is just semantics of a language. The man and the woman hung their heads when they heard the wisdom of the gods spoken so simply through the lips of their chief. Their tongues had been vicious, wanton and cruel. They were deeply stained. And now they had seen truth in Hawata's eyes and heard it in his words. They suffered the shame of their unworthiness. Needing no other punishment, they knelt with bowed heads, and after a silence in which all three prayed to their God, Hawata blessed each one, saying, go in peace, my brothers. Vow to keep henceforward the law of the brotherhood of the Spirit. And the one who had fallen sick through fear, lest his good name be lost, went home to get on with his work, thinking with pity of the worse ill those two had brought on themselves. After a while, pity shewed him likable and worthy traits in them. They're using a language here, which is not obviously the language we typically use. The pity shewed him, S-H-E-W-E-D, him likable and worthy traits in them, and forgiving them, he grew well in body and in mind. So what that's also pointing out is that people often get sick because they are holding on to something, anger, injustice. In the times we're moving through right now, there's quite a lot of people who feel the injustice of what's going on because they're seeing change happening and they feel it's wrong and they're railing against it. We're seeing that with the environmental pushback is the common word used these days, where people are getting enraged around climate change. They're seeing the fires, the floods, and of course those of a religious persuasion will see it as end times. And I think there is endings coming. I agree with that, but there's also new beginnings. What do they say from those ashes? When we have things burned to the ground, the miracle of life pushes through that hard earth, doesn't it? Here in Australia with the gum trees, when they go up in smoke, there's a lot of germination that happens. They grow quite fast. They're pretty hardy. So life is a given, and it's a truism to say that life is a given. And even from destruction, life somehow finds its way to emerge. It's funny, I just had the image of, what are they called? The pink, not stalks. I'm sure those of you watching this know what I'm talking about. Shame you can't give me the word. What are they called? I'll just share with you the image I saw. It was these pink birds up in the volcanoes. Really, really hot environment. They look like storks, but they're not called, they might be cranes, something like that. But whatever they are these birds that have become very hardy, and they can apparently survive these very hot conditions. And if you looked at the array of life on Earth, some of it is existing in the coldest of temperatures. Look at the penguins and how they all huddle together, sub-zero temperatures, minus 50, probably more. And we would die in those conditions. Others can live in the extremes of heat, germinate through heat. So life itself continues, and it will continue because it's far hardier than us. You see, we go first. And hence the environmental concern is really not the environment, it's our own survival is what the concern is. But this has occurred, of course, because we're out of step with nature. We don't know how to live in harmony with the natural world. And I'm giving you an insight into the Mayan way of thinking and how they resolve conflict. And, of course, our non-resolution of conflict is draining a lot of the resources that could have gone into higher teachings, into more mature ways of dealing with the conflicts and the problems that we are beset with on the earth. There have been wisdom teachings since time immemorial which were suppressed because it was seen as a threat, because that conflict was not resolved. See, on the one hand, we have those of religious persuasions believing in the one God and yet rejecting things that don't marry up with what is written down. And yet this living consciousness, if you like, is far beyond words, and words can never be accurate. Just in the very nature of words, I'm speaking words right now, but if I was to go into the heart and try and convey my words, it can never fully express. You go to different cultures who express through their languages. Some of them have far more words than the English language. They can go really deep into expression and articulation to create pictures or sounds or flavours or what have you, to fill in that spectrum. So we're very much limited by language in actual fact. That's why I go still. I go still to try and tap into something beyond words, because that's a far fuller expression, you see. It gives me the feeling, and I then try to translate the feeling through words. But even that is an awkward depiction. So to get to the truth, you can never do it through words. You have to go into the heart, which is beyond words. So what I'm driving at here is we have all these conflicts over words, but we're not recognizing the negativity within us that's using those words to justify negative behavior. And then we call it righteous, or we call it just. We will find justifications to validate the harming of the other. These are mind games played out so that we feel good, but we don't actually believe we're good. We just want to feel good. If they're wrong, if they're bad, if they're vilified, then I'm the just and righteous party here. Yet in the deeper truths, the moment you go into any form of criticism or negativity, it doesn't mean you don't constructively state your case and say, well, this is factually what I saw happen. The man picked up the gun and shot that person. That is a fact, being I witnessed, this is what I saw. If I go, he is a terrible, cruel, cold, calculating killer. That's a projection of a negativity onto them, and that's coming from within me. Where do I get that knowledge from? My own moments when I have felt in that way. So I'm using that as an example. What we see in the world is mirroring back to us who we are. What's in the other is in me. I couldn't see it if it didn't exist in me. These are the deeper truths. So this is where self-responsibility comes back to self. When you're really honest, you have to come back to your own self. You can't just sit there and blame the whole world. Even the case of the environmental stuff, if we go there for a moment, where have I not polluted the environment in my car? I have. I can't sit there and say, you should all be recycling, you should all be living off-grid. Whilst I do think that that's a practical solution, without a doubt, I know that that's one of the ways. But if I'm saying it with a righteousness that you should be doing it my way and you're destroying our planet and you should all be jailed. Well, if we really investigate that, well, those behaviours have come from a whole chain of behaviours from generation to generation. They are also unconsciously continuing on with ways and means of doing things that they've been taught by their peers, their fathers, their schools, universities, going back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, if you like. They may also have difficulty in changing because what do? You know, I'm looking at a house being built next door. I'm seeing all the wood constructed. They're bringing all this virgin timber. And I'm seeing the environment. That's clearly trees being chopped down, but these would have been pine trees probably in pine forests that have been grown for timber. I can see in my mind an earthship, which is made from recycled materials that would clearly be more beneficial if we're talking about resource depletion. Yet I look across at that house and I think, well, how would they change to an earthship? I mean, could they? You'd have to have a higher wisdom guiding a shift like that. But everyone has to be taken care of. These guys have livelihoods. Clearly they're going to be concerned for their family. And again, the wisdom of Tawaka, whatever his name is, Hawata, you don't put yourself and your family ahead of the well-being of all the people, was the wisdom coming from this Mayan chief. The well-being, the ensuring that the good of all is the first priority is what the wise will always say, because that's the holistic thinking, you see. Wisdom brings in the whole. It looks at all sides. It's coming from a higher perspective that sees the big picture. It's not just coming from self-interest that sees half the picture. That's why they go to the wise elder to resolve the disputes, because they can only see their side. They need a third party to come in to be fair. And this is your judicial process, really. This is where judicial oversight came from. Justice is the weighing of the scales, what's fair for both. You have to have wisdom to be able to balance those opposites. I spoke in my last video about the jester. It is also a figure or an archetype in the rebalancing of opposites through humour. It's to help them to jump out of this conflict locked in to a higher perspective where they join. The same applies with a judicial oversight, or in this case a chieftain who's helping them to be aware of the other side in order to learn from the experience and come together in unity at the end. And this is resolution of conflict. That's why this is important, what I'm reading for you. So I'm going to read the next case. This is very short, so I won't go on too much longer. One day a young woman, Moo, by name, funny name, Moo, was brought in by the people of her village. She was slim, graceful, gentle, and she was charged with violation of the law of sex. they held sacred. Naughty girl. There was silence in Hawatar's council chamber while an older woman with accusing finger, how many have met those, poured out a stream of words describing Mu's depravity. Downcast, motionless, the culprit stood as if she awaited deserved punishment. Hawatar, in his chair of justice, listened. Then, commanding silence, he asked Mu what she most wanted in life. So now I just want to step back from that for a sec. This is let's say he's in the position of a justice, which he is. He's asked the question, what does she want most in life? He didn't say, what's your side of the story? Because if you're in a court, they'll go, okay, here your side, here your side. Now, this is a different form of justice because this wise one is saying he's looking at motivation. So those questions are extremely important in respect of a Chief Justice. Putting Chief in there. That's where it came from. So I'll repeat that. He commands silence, and then he asked Mu what she most wanted in life. Sadly, with drooping head, she replied, I long above all to love truly and be loved, to hold my baby to my breast. But alas, I have no husband and no lover has been sent, and my lover has been sent away from me to a village far down the river. I am unhappy and lonely. Further questions brought out the fact that the older woman, the accuser, was the mother of Mu's lover and had herself parted them, hoping that she could prevent her son marrying the girl by long separation. So this is the interference of a mother who believes she doesn't want this girl in her family. So, I mean, how many families have had this experience where the mother-in-law doesn't like the union with her child, interferes to try and undermine it, separate them, or they're not welcome at her house, or, you know, this is quite a common grievance. Hawatar addressed her. There are sins of the mind far worse than those of the body. One can sin through greed of possession, and by sinning lose all. The love your son once bore you now turns to dislike and fear. Do you not know that you are despoiled and bereft? Already widowed, you will soon be childless too, for your son's love has died. Contrast your sin with this child's. She has fallen through love. Through her body's craving for a child, you deny her. For the natural rightful love of husband and wife. Woman, your sin is the more grievous, for you have driven this child to sin. Now, isn't that an interesting statement? I'm not really necessarily resonant with the word sin, but let's just say it's meaning to do something that's perceived by the group as wrong, okay? So this wise counsel is putting to her that she's actually losing the love of her own son because she's driven him away from the one he loves. She's also caused a problem for this poor young woman who would not have had sex because her desire for a child is so strong. She would not have gone into the arms of someone else had she not been so lonely and so hungry, as it's put in here, for this child. So he then realizes, so we could easily cast the first stone, so they say, at the one who's sinned. You're a sinner, you've done it, that's it, black and white, end of story. But love steps back and goes, okay, who manipulated this event? Who was actually behind those people? What was the negative aspect that parted love? So this young girl, through her suffering, has gone into a situation which is not going to benefit her, of course, because she will feel guilt about that. But she was, in a sense, put in a position where that was to happen. So that's why this wise counsel is making this point and saying that the mother has, in these words, the more grievous sin. For you've driven the child to sin. Most grievous. And this could be the same as anyone orchestrating violence by demonizing one way or another. Whenever we demonize a group or a person, we are actually manipulating in the background to get others to hate that other, to divide. That's the same type of thing. You're dividing it because you don't want it. You don't agree with it. But in truth, it's not your business to do that. It wasn't the mother's business to get involved with her son's relationship. If she was a loving mother, she'd want him to be happy. It's not about him choosing on the basis of what she believes he should be doing. That's not her right. That's her interference in his life. That is not love. And because it's not love, it mirrors back. He doesn't love her as a result of that, so therefore she suffers. And that's how what you do to an other returns to the self. He goes on to say, this is the wise counsel, most grievous it is that you have made yourself accuser and judge of Mu, who is hungry with mother love for love and her child. Hawata turned to the girl and said, my daughter, you have sinned. Yet who amongst us accuses you? No one spoke. He continued, no man or woman accuses you save one. Your sins are forgiven because you loved. I want to make that really clear for those who don't understand the nature of this. Your sins are forgiven because you loved. Another way of saying that too, unconditional love actually, I mean, some people might disagree with this and that's okay. It actually removes karma as well. Love is very powerful. It is true to say it's a purifier of sorts. So if you can love the one that hates you, your life will be in harmony. Doesn't mean that you condone what that other has done. You don't say, I'm loving you because I'm a victim and please do it again. No. You're simply saying I sit in a position of unconditional love and that doesn't change because I look deeper to the action, through the actions that you have done, to the essence of who you are, which is the mirror of myself. I see, and I think some of the wise ones that have walked the earth have definitely seen no sin because they looked very deeply into the eyes of that other. People get confused. They make mistakes. They get driven by greed. They feel insufficient, inadequate, not good enough. They believe they need all these material things to supplement the great void they're feeling inside. But what they don't understand is they'll never fulfill that void. You can have a mansion. You can have 5 mansions. You can own 3/4 of the earth. You can have it all, but you can have nothing if you do not know that inner love for yourself and others. If you don't know that, you have nothing. It doesn't matter how rich you are. And I'd actually assert that the wealthier people are, the less connected they probably are. I'm sensing. Depends on whether it was derived out of love or not, or greed. And greed has its seed in fear. Not enough. The flip side of greed is not enough. I need more and more. It's a hunger. People have to have more and more to display what they perceive as in many respects, a false power. Because when those things are all stripped away, they have no power. And the truth of them comes to light very fast because they've got nothing to anchor. There's nothing solid within them. Everything's scaffolding. They've supplemented, they've augmented self with all these things to project to the world that I am better, I am greater. This is the imbalance. This is what causes the powerlessness on the flip side. So as I take more, you get less. Now, in the Mayan society, they were trained from young to not take more than they need because they were aware of the needs of the other. This is the holistic. This is understanding your people. This is living in community. It's not just living for my own need and I don't really care. You can go eat cake, as Marie Antoinette was quoted as saying, because that's the sentiment behind that greed. But in truth, they have nothing. Because if you have everything within you, you don't actually need anything. That's why many of these wise ones walked the earth with nothing. They didn't need anything. The Indigenous people here in Australia, they were not building up lots of material possessions because they had a huge spiritual life. That's abundance. It's another reframing of wealth. But because we're so transfixed by money making, material possession, augmenting ourselves with all these wonderful things to make us look good, we're lost in our own confusion. And that dark shadow within the heart that was described grows because you end up criticizing other people because you don't love yourself. So what you see in yourself, you see in the other. They're useless eaters. They're a waste of space. They have no economic value. They're superfluous. We can do away with them. That is the dark shadow within your own heart projecting onto innocence. That's actually living a humble life in truth. Those ones know resiliency like you can't even imagine. Those ones travel through their dark shadow to come out the other end. They either lose their way and end their lives, or they find a strength, and I've interviewed quite a few now, they find a strength to overcome the sense of homelessness or loss or failure that gets projected onto them by others. In fact, they come out stronger. One I'm particularly thinking of right now is the most intelligent, wise, incredible man that I've met. I interviewed him. He was homeless. So, you know not what you do are the words that come to me, and what you see in another is in yourself. You're homeless. When you're looking at a person without a house as homeless, you are homeless. Harking back to the woman in the library I met who said, I'm homeless in my heart. She hadn't found that connection to that greater source that she said she believed in. She was seeking. She was still a seeker. I'm homeless, but I'm not. I have no home. Although I do. My home is wherever I am. And I'm at the moment, staying with a good friend who cares about my well-being. She's like family. That's like home. Yet, I have $2 in my bank. I've got a box of food. I've got a quarter of a tank of petrol. That's it. I'm not on any welfare. I don't have any assets to cash in. Yet I have no fear at all in my heart. Because home is where the heart is. I found my heart. And my work in the future will be to serve those who believe that they have no home. I'm going to show them the way home because I love everyone. And that's what wisdom, that's where it takes you. It's not that I'm wise, it's just that I've questioned and questioned because I've been through great hardship, because wonderful teachers came to me to challenge me. And I stepped up. If I hadn't stepped up, I wouldn't know what I know now. So how can that be a bad thing? It's not. See the yin and the yang of it. There is no enemy. There's only a potential possibility that you either see it or you don't. I see it. So I'm at the last paragraph, so I'll finish this off and then I'll conclude the video. So she had no sin because she loved. Then what he says is he says, no man or woman accuses you save one. Your sins are forgiven because you loved, as I said. I give you this woman into your hands. So the older woman is put in her hands now, the one that she's accused has the power. He's just rebalanced the power in the court. You shall pronounce judgment, Mu. and as you pronounce it, shall be done. So the accuser who was in judgment of her becomes the one tried. Isn't that interesting? So it's been reversed. So Mu now is in the position of having the power to judge this other. The girl came slowly forward and knelt before Hawata. Some influence seemed to pass from him to her, some interchange of thought. She rose, sure of herself, bowed thrice, so 3 times, and crossed to her accuser. For a moment the two gazed at each other, then fell into each other's arms. We watched while mother and daughter-to-be passed from shadow to sunlight with clasped hands. That's the book. The daughter-in-law forgave her accuser, and they watched them pass from shadow to light. That is why we resolve conflict. It is to actually assist you to move from the shadow of negativity into the illumined light of unity. These teachings that I've just read to you, I just found for the first time today. The book was on a shelf and I just felt drawn to it. That's how I find truth. It resonated, so I'm sharing it with you now. But as you can see, it's been constructed from a far broader story of a conflict I resolved yesterday by bringing 2 people out of shadow into the light. That is what love does. So those who are moving us from light into shadow by engaging in negativity, fear, revenge, surveillance, profiting in ways that people are not aware of, in ways that are disproportionate. So in other words, making way too much money, where on the flip side of that, there are those who are languishing in severe poverty. And in my narrative, it's not to say I really don't have the feeling of right versus wrong, like, aren't you mean doing that to them? I don't, because I see everyone as a teacher. This is really for everyone to decide and choose who you want to become. Past is the past. What have you learned from the past? Are you happy? Is this what you truly want? When you open your mind to the entire humanity on this planet and their needs and wants, and looking also at the species system here as well, the way forward is to come into balance. And I've talked about peace as balance before. Peace is not on a war footing. Peace is in the soldier that saves another, putting his life, the other's life, before his own. That's love in warfare. So war and peace, for example, are actually not polar opposites. There is peace in war. And if we were to really interview people who'd been in war, and I've met quite a few soldiers, there's a whole spiritual experience that's not been narrated at all. They would have seen apparitions because they've killed people. They've passed over into the next life. I've seen an apparition. I know they're real. So I know we live on. So when you know that and you come at life from that higher perspective that I'm actually moving through a story here and that I'm going to pass over one day and I live on, like my father just has, who's going through working out his life, what it was. But he's now in another form. It's a little bit like the law of thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics, where, it transfers. Energy transfers. Same applies with human spirit. leaves the body but moves on. So the real question for people is, how do you want to live your life? How do you want to be remembered? We're all playing out this dynamic, through dark and light. But ultimately, the goal is to step back into that reconciliation, that really there was no enemy and there really was no problem, which some of the highest teachers always knew. But we're still working things out. Many of us are not addressing the conflicts that are laying dormant within us, the pain and the wounds, because we don't want to go there. We use antidepressants. We drink. We take drugs. We have lots of sex as distractions from ourselves. We go traveling. But the hardest part is to actually come back to who you are, to sit with yourself in the silence without the television on and look at yourself. Become still. Because there is an illumined one within that stillness, which is your very own self. Because there is no separation. There's no separation between the sun and the rays of light. It's all coming from the one thing. And as the earth circles around the sun, we get different gradients of light to dark happening on the earth. What we see outside ourselves seems to change because of illumination going to darkness. We get frightened of the dark because we can't see. But if you close your eyes, you'll see in the dark, because that's where the light is. So I will leave you with that, with great love and peace. May you find your way to the light. The path is illuminated in actual fact. Take care. Bye.